What made you rage quit your job on the spot? Story 1. I started working at a lingerie and adult toy store when I was 18. After I made it through training, 2 weeks in, all of the other employees quit. For about 6 months, I was the only employee. I ran that store by myself. I took care of everything. I was working split shifts every day and never once was my till short by even a penny. Meanwhile, the owners kept interviewing new employees. They finally found a woman to come in and start training. I trained her, and after her 2-week training, they informed me that she would be my manager. Their only explanation was that she had previous management experience. I brought up the fact that I kept the store alive on my own for the last 6 months, working split shifts every day with no days off. I brought up the fact that I trained her. But they were adamant. They wanted her to be the manager. So I quit. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I had an inside hint from HR that there were about to be mass layoffs and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation, returning the day before layoffs were presumed to happen. My boss scolded me for daring to take a vacation. She said I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in a project to leave. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on vacation before the project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for the week I was away anyway, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was upset and said she was mad at me for having left and made her take care of my project. She criticized me in front of the entire company during a conference room meeting. I chilled and said, "Aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so I can collect unemployment." The entire room literally starts panicking and management tries to understand how I knew about layoffs. It was my one true Regina George causing chaos moment in my life. Story 3. I worked as a manager in a really awesome cafe bar. My interview was basically drinking a bottle of wine with the owner while chatting. It was a totally relaxed vibe, with local artwork on the walls, which she sold for no commission, indie music as background noise so you could still have a conversation, etc. One of the employees was in a band and often went on tour, and she always made sure his job was waiting for him when he got back. Fast forward 3 years, and she became pregnant with twins and decided she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. So she sold the place to a young man who purchased it as a gift for his fiancée. A nice gift, right? But it soon became apparent he did this because she couldn't hold down a job. Even the simplest tasks were entirely beyond her. It took me 4 weeks to teach her how to use the coffee machine. She spent evening shifts giving freebies to her friends and completely gave up on using the panini machine. After finally mastering the coffee machine, she announced they were going to redecorate, so we would either have to take a week off unpaid or use our holiday time. Everyone was forced to use holiday time. We came back a week later and didn't recognize the place. It now had white walls with huge T.Vs blaring out dance music in a space with only 12 tables, so loud that no one could hear anything. We checked the schedules, and I had lost 10 hours a week, but the band guy had lost 20 hours. Naturally, we asked why. She told us she could run the place without us, so she cut our hours. We asked if they could delay the new schedules by a month to give us a chance to find extra work elsewhere. I was okay since I had a second job begging me to go full-time, but the band guy wasn't. She said that since we didn't have contracts with her, she didn't have to give us any notice. I wasn't going to lie, I was furious. I took off my apron, placed my keys on the counter and said that since we didn't have contracts, I didn't have to give any notice that I quit. Then I promptly walked out and never went back. The place closed down within 3 months. Story 4. Going to the toilet before a meeting to negotiate a raise. I overheard both directors of the company, a small firm, everything ran through them talking outside the window. They said they were going to flat out refuse any offers and make the difficult employee work overtime to prove his loyalty, and he has no prospects anyway. Where will he go? I entered the meeting with my signed and printed resignation in hand, slapped it on the table after sitting down, and stood straight back up saying meeting over. I now work for a successful company, part of a brilliant team of 10 people, with an amazing pension, terrific bonuses, and clear progression opportunities, along with a great work-life balance. I also enjoy half days every single Friday for life. If you're being mistreated at a job, overworked, underpaid, or whatever it may be, get your affairs in order and walk away. Story 5. Not quite on the spot, but the manager was telling the new hires, which included me, how he beat the heck out of someone, for some reason that I cannot recall. Apparently the court case had been dragging on for quite some time. Alrighty, little crazy, but what manager is completely sane? Then, a few weeks later, a hurricane came through. It was pretty bad. My house only lost power for one day, but most of my coworkers lost power for at least 2 weeks. So, we eventually went back to work, and the manager was telling us the harrowing story of how he managed to find a generator when a hurricane was coming. I'll spare you the details, but it's nearly impossible to find a generator right before a hurricane hits. So this nutcase was trying to install this generator at his house, and saw someone driving by, eyeballing his generator. Or so he imagined. Like any completely normal person, the manager pulled out a gun and fired a few rounds into the air to scare them off. I can only imagine what the poor person driving by thought when he saw this man pull out a gun and start shooting. In response to the gunshots, his neighbor came running over. Why had no one called the police yet to see if everything was okay? My manager told him that someone was trying to steal his generator, and if it went missing, he was going to hold the neighbor responsible. At this point in the story, my mouth was hanging open, and I was like, what did I just listen to? This man is insane. Why is the neighbor responsible for his generator? None of this makes sense. I slowly noped out of that job. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he ended up harming all of his coworkers one day in a fit of rage. That story convinced me to leave immediately. Story 6. My first job in high school was washing dishes at a pub. I got it so I could buy my girlfriend a necklace that she wanted as a Christmas present. Come New Year's Eve, they decided to put one person on dishes for a packed evening. I was quickly overwhelmed. The kitchen was supposed to close at 10 p.m. But at 11 p.m. I was still doing dishes, and the overweight chef was watching me, laughing about how I'm not going to be able to spend the New Year's moment with my little girlfriend. I just said, I just remembered, I don't need to do this, and walked out of that place and never went back. I'll never know that freedom again. Haha. Story 7. I am a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about 1 month, I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, "You know this has been going on forever, right?" She then said that things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She also told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. Story 8. I am a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about 1 month, I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager, not being as astute as she should have been, and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, "You know this has been going on forever, right?" She then said that things would never change, and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She also told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. Story 9. I worked for a privately owned bakery for exactly 1 week. The owner's son came in, walked past the counter and into the bathroom. He came out a few minutes later without acknowledging me or my coworker, got into his car and drove away. We both looked at each other, then opened the door only to find this guy literally made a huge mess all over the toilet seat and the toilet paper holder. I called the owner, told her what happened, and she said to deal with it. So, I asked my coworker if she wanted to clean it up because I wasn't going to. She declined and I told her I was walking out. She did as well. We locked up the store and told the owner we quit but would reconsider staying if her son came back to clean up his own mess. She yelled and berated us for about 20 seconds before I said goodbye and hung up. Story 10. I worked at a company for about a year and a half as an assistant project manager. During that time I had 3 different bosses, the newest being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20% below the standard salary for the position, overworked without any additional compensation, and the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day. I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming, and I just cut her off and said, "I'm not doing this anymore. I quit." She yelled back, "Well, I need it in writing." I replied with the straightest face, "I don't have to do anything in writing." I quietly packed all my stuff up, wished my coworkers good luck, and left. A year later, after working a couple of other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and now make almost twice as much as I was making before, and I get to post on Reddit while at work without getting yelled at. Story 11. I worked for a restaurant, pub. The owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time, often forcing the bartender to stay well past closing time serving them. Obviously, we were told not to charge anything because it was the owner's party. After hours of drinks on the house, no tip, not even from the owner. This started to happen frequently. Usually, we tolerated if they left or were done before close. Then we started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were still being paid because we made about $4 an hour, but the kitchen wasn't tipped and relied on their hourly wage. Turns out the owner was a total drunk idiot, which should have been obvious, and had buried himself in debt. A week later, we were told our checks weren't there on the scheduled payday. 2 days later, still no checks. I told them if mine wasn't there the next day, I wouldn't show up for my shift. They said it had arrived. I got there and was told, well, what I meant was, it's actually on the way. I talked to them. I later found out no checks were ever issued again. They tried to pay some people in cash, but it all fell apart soon after. Edit. For those guessing the place, this was about 12 years ago, and it went out of business not long after I left. Someone else bought it, renamed it, and made it successful. I believe it's still operating well today. Story 12. I was already there 3 hours past the time my shift was supposed to end, along with everyone else who was on my shift. We were all very frustrated. I get that you often have to stay late when you work in food service, but everyone from the next shift was already there, and there was zero reason for us to stay for 3 extra hours. Finally, someone asked to go home, and the manager started screaming in the middle of the restaurant floor. Just because your shift is supposed to end at 10 does not mean you get to leave then. I tell you when you get to leave. You are all just numbers on a spreadsheet to us. We can replace you in a heartbeat if you don't want to be here. So I dropped all the money on the table in front of her and said, "Replace me then, forget you." I found out later that they lost nearly half their staff that night, because most others followed my lead. There was a huge football game the next day, right across the street from the place, and they had to deal with that with no servers. I went to the game and had the time of my life. It was an IHOP. Story 13. I was working at one of those stands that sell flash frozen ice cream droplets. You know the ones. It was at an amusement park. One hot summer day, I was standing in the sun in front of my -40-degree freezer, simultaneously burning and freezing at the same time. I had a long line of customers, because I was near the exit to a stunt show featuring a particular superhero who is a knight of darkness. I scooped some ice cream balls into the plastic tray, slid my scoop over the top to quickly knock off the excess ice cream, and then handed it to the customer in exchange for their money. A wild manager appeared. Suddenly, a manager told me I hadn't leveled off the ice cream correctly. He took the scoop and small bowl from my hands and leveled it off just like I had done for the previous customer. He then dumped it back into the freezer and made me do it again while standing over my shoulder. Mind you, I still had a long line of customers. So, I did it again, and this time he still wasn't pleased and berated me some, making me dump it out and do it again. I did literally the same thing a third time, and this time he was somehow fine with it and wandered off to annoy another teenager making minimum wage. I was confused about what I was doing wrong and had a line of customers staring at me, leaving me thoroughly embarrassed. I proceeded to overfill every container and handed them out to each customer without taking any money. Then I simply walked out to my car and drove home. I never turned off or secured my register, never formally quit, never said a word to anyone. I just walked away. If I was doing something wrong, fine. But there is no time when it's appropriate to scold and reprimand an employee in front of customers. I haven't been back to that amusement park as an employee or customer since. Story 14. I worked for a junk company that initially started off pretty good until it was bought out by a new owner from British Columbia. The new owner started implementing so many new policies that prevented us from making the decisions we once were able to make, and also new restrictions that would make us lose our profit share for the day at the smallest mistake. It didn't help that she also hired a terrible ringer to be our new general manager, who could not have been more out of touch with normal employees. Not even a month after this new manager arrived, he kept saying we were messing up constantly, saying we had the worst records of the entire company, the worst driving records, etc. It was like he only thrived off telling us what we did wrong. So we were really busy one day, and instead of actually starting work, he wanted us to have another meeting where he could scold us for messing up constantly. It was also only a week after the last meeting. We were only supposed to have them once a month. The meeting was set at 7:30 a.m. for him to scold us for half an hour and then get to work on a busy day where we're forced to go as fast as we can without messing up even once. The stress of being forced to work faster while also screwing us over with all these stupid new regulations had reached its boiling point with me. So instead of going to the meeting, I called him at 6 a.m. and told him I was never coming in again. He begged me not to leave and asked if I could at least do that one day, but I said no, go jump in a lake, and hung up the phone and blocked his and all his associates' numbers, then went back to sleep. I now work for myself, and from what I heard after I quit, a ton of people quit from that place. I can imagine it's going to stay in business much longer. Story 15. I worked at a Dollar General for about a month. That was all I could tolerate. The main issue I had was that I was constantly criticized for not stocking shelves well, yet I was never given specific guidance on how to improve. Literally, I was told things like, "You're stocking shelves poorly, do better," with no constructive feedback from the manager. Cracking under the pressure. On my last full shift, I gave my absolute best effort to stock shelves better than I ever had. I cleaned the bathrooms to a spotless finish, though no one had complained about them before. I even had the key holder, an assistant manager type, check my work, and I received praise and confirmation that everything looked great. To answer this Reddit question, the manager greeted me at the door the next morning for a performance review, and I naively thought I was finally getting the praise I had worked so hard for. Instead, she tried to claim that I had left a huge mess in the men's room toilet, and that my stocking job was the worst she'd seen yet. I was furious and told her I felt I was being treated unfairly. She responded that she was sorry I couldn't take criticism. I told her I was sorry she'd have to start pulling applications again to find someone else to deal with her nonsense. Know your worth, people. Story 16. Nothing dramatic. After working extremely hard during the pandemic and being promised an additional bonus, I received a low performance review, conveniently timed just one day before the bonus was due. That review canceled the bonus. Given all the other nonsense I had been putting up with, I finally broke and quit. I had a nice month off, and my new job pays significantly more. Never work for people who don't appreciate you. There are always others who will. Story 17. I had a very stressful job and was expected to answer Slack messages from my boss at any time, or I would be fired. He was in a different time zone, so often I would be woken up at 3 a.m., being yelled at to do something. One day in the office he was talking badly about me on Slack and accidentally posted it in a channel I was part of. I was working myself to the bone for this man, and he didn't even appreciate it. I packed up and left. It was the best decision I've ever made. Story 18. At 17, I was a young line cook at an upscale Italian restaurant. I was picking everything up so quickly I knew all the stations on the line within 10 months of hiring. I was getting minimum wage at the time, $7.25 per hour, and asked for a $1 per hour raise to reflect my diverse capabilities. I got denied and asked the chef when I could get it then. She said, "You're too young for a raise. Just be happy with minimum wage." In response, I said I might have to start looking elsewhere for a job that will pay me what I'm worth. She then said, "Don't you know how expendable cooks are? If you leave, I can replace you on the spot." So, I did. A Sunday evening dinner service, very busy, at the height of the night, my friend who I got hired with and I took off our aprons and walked off the line towards the front door. He came with me in solidarity, plus I was his ride home. That felt good for a day or two, but I've never quit that way since. I have been in the service industry for 23 years now. Story 19. It wasn't an on-the-spot quit, but I was passed over for a promotion for a role I had been doing unofficially for 6 months. There was no official position when I started. It was one of the manager's responsibilities that was delegated to me. Honestly, I was happy to do it and was frequently praised for how efficient and thorough I was. So, when the official position opened up full-time, I seemed like the obvious choice. Many coworkers didn't even apply because they said there was no point since I was obviously getting the job. They gave it to a man from a different department who had no experience with the complicated system required for the job. Then the manager asked me to train him, except I wasn't really asked. It was more like I was voluntold. I refused. I told the manager, if I sept not good enough to get the job, I sept not good enough to teach someone else how to do it. The manager accused me of throwing a temper tantrum. I quit about a week later. Honestly, that wasn't the only reason, but that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Even the other managers couldn't believe he said that. Story 20. This is the total opposite, but still a good story in my opinion. I worked at a very dysfunctional family-owned company. They put me on probation because the family member, my boss in charge of IT, convinced everyone else he was a genius who could do no wrong. So, whenever something bad happened related to IT, he would just blame his underlings and everyone in power agreed with him. A few weeks later, when I got the dream job I have now, I said in the exit interview that one of the main reasons I was leaving was because I was tired of being on probation for more than 3 months. They had actually taken me off probation but never told me. I still would have left regardless. But the fact that they never told me, "Hey, we are not going to fire you," blew my mind. Story 21. I worked at a restaurant as a server. We had just catered a large wedding reception. The owner's wife was chatting with the wedding party all night and occasionally getting drinks. At the end of the night, she said she was taking her share of the tips since she helped so much. I said fine, even though that is illegal in our state. An hour and a half after the party ended, the restaurant was still a mess, and the owner's wife was just standing around talking while I was supposed to clean up. It was almost midnight, and I had worked at my other job earlier that day. I walked out without saying a word. They ended up giving me all of my tips on my last paycheck. Story 22. The owner pulled a gun which was unloaded on us during training to prepare us for an armed robbery. That was terrifying. Story 23. I had a boss scream, "This is a dictatorship, and I'm the dictator," in a meeting while slamming his fist on the desk. That moment made it clear I couldn't work there anymore. Story 24. I had worked for a cleaning company and had a total disaster of a person named Tina as my manager for about 4 months. Tina would work the night shift with a crew and basically did nothing. She would leave the majority of the work for me to do during the day when it was much harder since I had my own list of duties as well as whatever she left for me from her own list. I was teetering on the edge of quitting but hadn't found a replacement yet when one day I got a call from head office saying Tina had quit. For about a month, the job was exceptionally better, and I effectively was my own boss. Things were going remarkably smoothly for about another month when I got a text message from Tina asking me to do a bunch of extra stuff. I called the owner, and they told me Tina had approached them about coming back and that they were rehiring her in her former position. I literally just packed up and walked out about an hour into my shift. I had zero intention of working another minute for that woman, and I stuck to it. Walking out was the best decision I ever made. Story 25. My first job was working as a dishwasher at a seafood place. I wasn't hired as a dishwasher. I was supposed to be a busser. They just shoved me onto the washer and left me there. One of the other employees there was an elderly man who worked alongside his wife and grandson. Every day he would find an excuse to walk up close to me and put his hand on my backside. He was a 70-year-old man, and I was a 16-year-old boy. I should have reported him, but I doubted anyone would have believed me since he had been there for years, and I had only been working for a month. I just called the manager, told her I had to quit for school reasons, and never looked back. Story 26. The debt relief law firm I worked for stole $19,000 in incentives from a young family that was in distress and losing their home. It was soaked up in bogus attorney fees and celebrated in the office. I remember the partners laughing about it over lunch, calling it a win. No one cared that the family was left worse off than before. It was the moment I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. Story 27. I got blamed for something that was not my fault. I was in an argument with our vice president of marketing because I had the audacity to suggest a solution that would have avoided our problem instead of accepting fault for something I did not do. He told me he does not pay me to think, so that was my last day. Story 28. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman where I work. I work underground, and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual started working, and after a few weeks, decided that it wasn't for him due to bad conditions and a hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give 2 weeks' notice, and without missing a beat, the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks, you're going to notice that I'm not here." Turned around, packed his belongings, and left. He was never heard from again. Story 29. I was hired to do payroll and accounts at a small welding and engineering firm. Entering the timesheets and checking them against rosters, I realized that the stingy owner had been shorting employees almost 3 hours each week by not paying them for toolbox talks and related tasks. I printed the proof, informed the workers in the workshop, and left immediately. I emailed my resignation from my car. Story 30. I had a job where the people were toxic. The management was mostly toxic, and the other technicians made themselves look better by making other technicians look bad. I had 2 guys on my shift who would go behind me during maintenance or repairs and undo the work I did, then call it out over the radio for everyone to hear. So, I started recording myself making the repairs. When I got called out and showed the video, I was told, "You are not supposed to have your phone out on the floor," and I got written up. I walked out without any warning in the middle of the busiest weeks of the year, leaving them short-handed with only 2 fools to handle calls. Story 31. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy with small fries and a drink for our lunch break. One day when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and my coworkers. I couldn't believe it. This grown, successful businessman was hounding a 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. I told him I wasn't going to pay, put the food down, and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend, but I told them no thanks and never went back. Story 32. I walked into the interview, everything went well, and I accepted the job offer. I went to the front desk to do the paperwork and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 per week. I first asked about the pay difference and was told, "Oh, this is the standard contract. It just hasn't been updated for your specific offer." I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. They responded, "Oh, that's not how things work here." I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to start, asking where I was. I told them, since I didn't sign the contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. Story 33. I was getting married. I had a temporary job and told them on my first day that I needed a weekend off in a couple of months for my wedding. I reminded them every couple of weeks, had it on the calendar, and even reminded them that Monday. That weekend came, and I was on schedule. I told my boss that I needed it off for my wedding, and she said, "You're just a kid, can't you move it? We really need the parts." Admittedly, I was 21 marrying my 19-year-old girlfriend, but yeah. I laughed at her and left. We were scheduled Saturday and Sunday, 2 attendance points, and you're fired, so I assumed that I'd be job hunting on Monday after my wedding. I went to another temp agency on Monday and had a job lined up for Monday evening. On Tuesday, the temp job called and asked if I was coming back. I told that person, the temp agency lady, what they'd done to me. She was upset that they'd done that, tried to get me to go back, but I liked the new job and stayed there. Story 34. I worked for a placement agency at a manufacturing facility. I had worked 7 of my 8-hour days when one of the supervisors came by to ask anyone on the crew I was on if they would stay for another 4 hours. We all looked at each other and politely declined. They came back one more time to ask, and again we declined. Then they came back and demanded that one of us stay behind for the 4-hour shift or all of us were going to be written up for attendance. This upset everyone, but because we were work placement instead of employees, we were unsure who to talk to. Some of the other crew told the supervisor they couldn't because they had to pick up their kids, etc. When the supervisor left, the crew had multiple people saying they couldn't get written up again or they would lose their job. I had scheduled a dinner with my in-laws, so I called my husband and told him the situation and that I would stay. Told the crew, "I'll stay, don't worry." Told the supervisor, got put on another crew that had work for 1 hour but was required to stay for the full 4 hours. The next day, I called the main office and explained the situation. They said they had a representative on site due to this manufacturer being such a large client. Called the on-site representative and explained the situation. Was told they have a lot of attendance issues. Again, I explained I had never had attendance issues and everyone on my crew was threatened with being written up for not staying 4 hours after their scheduled shift. The on-site representative still defended the actions of the supervisor and showed an attitude toward me. "Fine, I don't need you, I quit." And that's the story of how I learned about my workers' rights and workplace harassment. Story 35. I had a job about 10 years ago doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage plus bonuses you earned for selling people services. And by services, I mean poor quality antivirus service that you can get online for free. I was still in the phase of training where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls, and after a call he told me I should have paused to try and sell him some poor quality antivirus service before I fixed his problem. Handed in my headset right there. I felt so uncomfortable when people called for help and I had to act like a telemarketer. Story 36. I worked for a T-Mobile store and authorized reseller, not an official dealer. One week, I had an amazing week. Sold 55 phones, brand new activations on a business account with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happened so you could show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections, and they settled before I took them to court. The company went out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually led to an investigation by the government, according to an old coworker I bumped into years later. Story 37. When I was 16, I was a busboy working off the books. I made $250 a week working 35 hours a week because they paid per day as opposed to per hour. My manager came to me and said they were restructuring how the pay scale worked and that he wanted me to work fewer days, the same amount of hours but for half the pay. I made him repeat his plan, and once he confirmed it, I said, "Give me money for the week because I said I'm leaving." Story 38. I worked at Walmart for a short time. I worked as hard as I possibly could to unload their pallets of merchandise. I always thought I was so very fast. I studied the process, and I believed I perfected it. Every single day, my manager came up to me and told me I needed to be faster. So I did, and the fast pace made me lose a little focus, causing me to break a finger. I let management know that I might be a little slower due to my injury, and they straight up told me, "We won't tolerate any laziness," and wrote me up when I didn't meet their ridiculous standards. So, I went home after my shift and never returned. Never called, never formally quit. I just never came back. Forget Walmart. Story 39. Being hired to sell cars. Then in the middle of training, I got pulled aside and told I was being moved to lot attendant. That position paid minimum wage, and I didn't even get a chance to be on the sales floor. I left and never went back. I was in my mid-20s at the time and was trying to find a possible career. I didn't have time for that nonsense bait and switch. Story 40. I got mugged on a delivery for Domino's and came back to the shop crying and panicked. My phone, wallet, and the pizza were all taken. I rushed to tell my manager what had happened. "Anon, are you hurt?" he asked, looking me over with concern that didn't seem to reach his eyes. "No, but I lost my phone and wallet," I said, voice shaking. "I need to call the police." He waved me off, already reaching for another ticket. "No time for that. Here's your next delivery." It was about 2 blocks from where I had just been mugged. I didn't say anything else. I just went home. The police never really did much to get my phone and wallet back, not like they could. Story 41. I worked for an attorney while I was 7 months pregnant. I was hired to be a secretary, but instead I was constantly sent out in the July heat to serve papers like a process server. By the end of my 3-month probation in August, I was supposed to receive a raise, but she told me she couldn't give me one. That same day, I left at lunch and never went back. She was an awful person. The guy I had replaced told me, on his way out during my first day, that he felt sorry for me. Looking back, I should have left right then. Story 42. I worked as a cashier in a local shop. One night, 2 men came at me with knives trying to get into the till. I just walked away and said, "Have at it," as it wasn't worth risking a fight for minimum wage with a couple of guys waving knives at me. After they ran out of the store, I picked up my mobile phone and called the police, then called the store manager. The next day, the district manager met me when I arrived for my shift. Her first words were that it was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while at work. I laughed at her, told her she could take this as my notice, and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up before, but the sheer gall of that really got to me. Story 43. I was working for a financial company in Southern California for about a month at the time. It was a little stuffy, but otherwise okay. Then my manager came over and asked why I took so long in the bathroom, literally 5 minutes to use the restroom. He mentioned something about having to count it as a break and told me to be more careful in the future or something. I laughed, handed him my badge, and left. Story 44. I was already having a bad day. My transfer request was denied, and supervisors were on my back like they owned the place. Nearing my lunch break, a customer stopped me asking about a price check. I wasn't able to do a price check and said, "Please take it up to the front. They can help you there." That wasn't good enough. The customer proceeded to berate me, almost making me cry. Finally, she said, "How about you just go away?" Like what? Knowing that management wouldn't do anything. I just left. Being abused for minimum wage, not worth it. Story 45. I began working at a Persian restaurant, in the kitchen. I slightly overcooked a steak, and the owner came back, threw a plate at us, then a hot meat skewer before storming off to his office. I dropped my apron, grabbed my bag, and told him I was leaving. His response was, "Okay, at the end of the night you can go." My response was, "Clearly you don't understand. I'm leaving right now. Here's my parking pass, and I'll expect my paycheck in the mail." Story 46. My grandfather, who I considered like a father, passed away after a long stay in the hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day of his funeral off, since I was organizing part of the arrangements and taking a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral finally came, and the staff started calling me, leaving messages asking why I wasn't at my shift. They told me while I was in a suit hosting family members at the funeral home, that I had to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out, and never looked back. Story 47. I worked at a sushi restaurant, and we had secret menu items that no one went over with me. The owner was sitting with a guest, I assume they were friends, and he ordered one of the secret menu items. I said, "I'm sorry, we don't have that," and she immediately stood up and started screaming at me, called me a complete idiot, and then snapped her fingers, yelling "servers" to call the others over. At this point, I was taking my apron off and grabbing my keys to walk the heck out of there. Story 48. The boss wanted my team to work extra shifts without weekends to finish the next project milestone, so we could show the client we were capable of completing it before the due date. We worked 14 hours daily for 4 weeks with no weekends, and during the last 2 days we worked for 36 hours straight without breaks, since the deadline was approaching fast. Everyone was exhausted and on edge. No smiles, no small talk, nothing. And we didn't get paid for overtime. After finishing the milestone, he thanked us and called a meeting, saying we had to continue working like this indefinitely until they hired more staff. A colleague and I refused and said we would only work the hours we were paid for, 9 hours per day, 5 days a week. He didn't take us seriously, but honestly, we didn't care anymore. We worked the next 2 weeks on schedule. Then he called us in and said he was extremely disappointed and that we didn't value the company. I walked out, collected my things, handed my resignation letter to HR and said goodbye. Story 49. I was 18. During my lunch break, a drunk manager came into the break room, asked me a bunch of invasive personal questions, and when I was curt and evasive, she exited the room, closed the door, and loudly announced to the office, "What a jerk." I gathered my things and walked out. An assistant manager followed me out, and even tried to block my car from leaving the parking lot. I pulled around him and left. Later, I heard the story being spread in the office that I almost ran him down in the parking lot. Not even close. Story 50. I worked as a waiter at a place that promised me full-time hours but only gave me part-time hours. They expected me to be at the top of my game despite not paying me enough and barely giving me enough hours to survive. They scheduled me to work on the day I was taking my girlfriend, who was visiting from out of town, to the station. When I asked for 1 hour off so I could take her to the station, they said no and lectured me on how I was no more special than anyone else who worked there. It was raining all week and there was a food festival in town, so the restaurant was dead all week. I left that day and never went back. Story 51. An upper manager bullied a coworker until he tragically offed himself. Then the manager turned his attention to me, yelling at me in front of subordinates, yelling at me over the radio, sabotaging my workload and projects. I simply said, "No way, dude. I don't care who you are or how much money I'm making. I'm not accepting that level of abuse." I walked out and called the district manager, told him I left my credentials in his office and that I wouldn't be coming back. When I had my exit interview, I was very honest and was offered a lateral promotion to a sister company, but the taste in my mouth was simply too sour. Story 52. I worked a retail job as a cashier at a store whose name sounds like hose. One part of that job, as I'm sure many who have shopped there know, is to sign customers up for our rather exploitative credit card. We were supposed to ask every customer, no matter the dollar amount of the transaction. Well, I was helping a woman and told her she could save some money if she signed up for the credit card. She seemed interested, but I could clearly tell that English was not her first language. I grabbed one of our pamphlets and made it abundantly clear to her that this is a credit card, not a rewards account or something of that nature. When she understood, she said, "Oh no, not today." Understandable. Well, I didn't know one of my supervisors was standing behind me. After she left, he asked why I did all of that, and if I tried to talk every interested customer out of signing up. When I explained myself, he said, "Next time sign them up. They don't know any better." I handed him my red vest. That was it. Story 53. I took a temporary job in a call center. It was outbound sales, calling people and offering them Time magazine's newest book, Portrait of the Presidents. We had a rule of having to hear no 3 times on a call before we could end the call. In the first 5 minutes on the floor, I placed 6 calls and was hung up on, verbally insulted, and yelled at for interrupting dinner. After the 6th call, I took a deep breath, hung up my headset, and walked right out of there. Story 54. It was Thanksgiving Day at Kmart. I was a teenager, and I had been working non-stop for 5 hours because of all the good deals. I had a drink under my register and took 1 sip of it. The assistant manager looked at me but didn't say anything. 10 minutes later, it was time for my much-needed 30-minute lunch. I asked for coverage for my break, but the assistant manager told me I didn't get lunch since I took a drink of my Sprite. I told her too bad and walked away, got all my stuff out of my locker, and started walking to the parking lot. Then the store managers rushed out, begging me to come back and work, and apologized. They said I could take my lunch. They even had the assistant manager awkwardly apologize to me. I think she got in big trouble because she never treated me like a jerk anymore. Story 55. Fun times. Working at a grocery store when I was a teenager. I was still on my own, working any job I could to make ends meet. I guess I didn't work hard enough, being a one-man crew in front of a store manager who told me to go faster, which was impossible, and do even better for my $4.25 per hour. I tried explaining I was going as fast as I possibly could when he said, "You'll do what you're told, as fast as you're told if you want to keep this job. You should be so lucky." I decided right then and there, I said rather starve than work for someone whose high point in life is being the assistant manager at a buy-low grocery store. I quit on the spot. Never compromise your self-worth for a job. You are worth more than that, and you should bet on yourself always. Story 56. My older boss didn't understand how an Excel spreadsheet worked. Fresh out of graduate school, I did some calculations for him as he requested, printed them out, and he proceeded to freak out on me because I hadn't done them by hand. Yelling, he berated me in front of everyone in the office, took my water glass and threw it against a wall, breaking it into pieces. Then a coworker looked over my work and said everything was done correctly. I applied for a new job after work that day, where I've worked for over 7 years now. I can deal with lots of garbage, but I'm not dealing with a boss who has the emotional capacity of a 2-year-old. Story 57. Before I started working at Dollar Tree, I asked if I could have a day off on Sunday, and they said sure, and that they promised to give me that day off. During my first week working there, I asked every single day for a work schedule and reminded them that they promised that I would get Sunday off. That entire week, they refused to give me a schedule and called me at random times of the day to work, which was ridiculous, because at the time, I had college classes to attend, so it was a battle on what time I could work. When Sunday came, I was at a carnival with my husband. He bought tickets for that day, and it was his only day off to spend time with me. And the moment we decided what to do together, my boss called and told me to come to work. I was baffled and reminded her that she and the others promised that today I could have off since I worked all 6 days at random times without complaint. She said in a very mean way that she never promised such a thing to me and demanded I come to the store immediately. At that moment, I told her to forget herself, and I quit over the phone. The next day, I made a complaint to the company about how unprofessional she and the others were with me, and gave them pictures showing how unsafe the environment was for our younger workers there. Story 58. I worked as a delivery driver for Pizza Hut for 2 years. By the end, only one person from the original crew was still there. The area coach had a habit of changing the schedule mid-week without telling anyone, then getting angry when we didn't show up for shifts we hadn't even known we had. The final straw came when he had our 6th new manager call me and say that if I wasn't there by noon, I'd be fired. I panicked. My wife had the car for her job, so my mom rushed to get me there. When I showed up, he said he was going to write me up for missing a scheduled shift. I told him I wasn't on the schedule, and even showed him a picture to prove it. He still accused me of always doing this, meaning not checking a schedule he constantly altered without notifying us. Right then, I decided I'd had enough. I took off my vest and hat, left them on the counter, and walked out. It sucked in the moment, but that area coach was the worst. I never looked back, and I got a new job where I'm actually moving up. So yeah, good for me. Story 59. I'd been left to close up alone more times than I could count at a fancy fish shop that absolutely required 2 people, especially with the window display setup. But the chef/manager was lazy and always found a way to bail early. One day I badly burned my forearm when some batter splashed into the deep fryer harder than expected. I was in pain, shaking, trying to cool the burn while staff from other nearby stores came over with first aid kits and cold towels to help. Right then, the so-called captain manager strolled by holding a salad he set made for the lunch rush. He saw me clearly injured and casually said, "Hurry up, I set men heading out early." That was it. I grabbed the keys, slammed them down in front of him, and told him to go jump in a lake. He had the audacity to ask me how he was supposed to close on his own. I didn't even bother answering. Story 60. I started a job and asked to work morning shifts because my dad would have to pick me up after sleeping for a couple of hours if I worked late. He worked 14 to 16 hours from 4 a.m. to 7 p.m. and went to bed at 8 p.m. They scheduled me for night shifts instead of what I asked for and scheduled me for 39 hours a week for a month. I applied for part-time, but what they wanted me to do was work full-time without any benefits. I asked them if they could reduce my hours because it was too much, and they told me they hired me to work those hours so I could either quit or work the schedule they made for the next month. I quit after 4 days because that was not what I signed up for, and I wasn't about to have my dad worry about me getting home at night and interrupting his much-needed sleep. I quit after 4 days because I wasn't willing to risk my dad's sleep and my safety. Story 61. This was back in the day shortly after college when I was still working as a delivery driver at a local pizza place. It was expensive pizza, and the tips were good, plus it was during the height of the Great Recession, so I was just glad to have a job. Because I had just graduated, it freed up my schedule. I started regularly getting put on the lunch shift, which was absolutely terrible. All your work is from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and it's super stressful, then it's completely dead, meaning no tips from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Cool, so you're just doing dishes for minimum wage. Then the manager started trying to send me home anytime there wasn't an active delivery, so I'd get halfway there, and then a delivery would call in and I'd get called back. In the end, he saves 35 cents in wages, but I spend money on gas plus wear and tear on the car. Then one day, I came in and looked at the schedule. It's the clopen from hell. I'm on from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. Thursday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Friday, and 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. Saturday. The only shift where you would make real money is the Saturday shift. I said no way and left a note on his desk resigning. The worst schedule made me quit on the spot. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.